Joe, thanks for being here for this week's Pod Pros class. Really excited to have you here.
Alex, thanks for having me back. It's always great to talk to you, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And have you back. You're right. Yeah, this is the second time you've been on this. You're
Yeah,
definitely the only person who's been on it twice. We've got a list of about 100 people waiting for the first
cool.
time. So try to stay away from the mob that might be after you now, right? So
There you go. I was going to say, I will do my best not to disappoint.
right. Thank you so much. I want to start off by mentioning something. I love your tagline, and it just says "I shoot people."
Yeah.
And now that I said that, you've got to give some explanation as to what you do real quick before we move along, Joe.
Yeah, right. So I shoot people with a camera.
Right.
I'm a
Thank you.
photographer. I've been a photographer my whole life. Um, I still don't know what I'm going to do when I grow up. And I'm not joking. I've done all different kinds of photography, but the common thread, I've always photographed people. So that's where the tagline comes from.
Yeah, I love it. Man, I got to say this. I so respect your work. Like everyone's got to, what's your web address just so people can find it?
It's my name, joeedelman.com.
Perfect. You've got some like just captivating pictures on the website. Like I've just scrolled through them and like stop. I'm like, holy cow, it's just stunning. Like you clearly have got some experience. Maybe you don't need to figure out what you're going to do when you grow up because this seems to be working all right for you.
So far, but it might be what I'm doing now. It might be a little bit different, but it'll have a camera for sure.
Love it. So one of the things that you've really started getting into though is the education side of
Yes,
I'm not even sure how long you've been doing that, but the education side of photography. Can you talk with that for a minute? Because that's going to lead right into our topic for today.
I can. So the short answer is it's been about 9 years since I first started teaching. I mean, when I was younger, I did some community beginner photography classes and that, but really going at the teaching pretty solid and now full time for the last 5 years. Um, it was something I never thought about doing. I was probably one of those people. It's like, oh yeah, teachers. No, I'd rather be doing it. And I'm kind of proud, honestly, that I found out at this stage of the game, I'm probably actually better at teaching than I am as a photographer. I mean, don't get me wrong. I appreciate your kind words about my photography and I love what I do. But man, I could list off 100 photographers whose work I look at and I gotta say, I hate them just a little bit because I can't see the world the way they see the world, and
Right.
and it's frustrating. We all have our creative limitations. The teaching stuff, I guess it's right time, right place. It comes from a lot of years of experience, a lot of years of screwing things up, scraping my knees, banging my elbows, and getting back up and plugging away.
Yeah, I think we'll always find somebody better at whatever we do, but it's really cool that you just acknowledge the fact that education is something that you've been able to do really well at. And I mean, your social channels show that. Like you've got really solid engagement. You've got
Yeah.
people that are actually coming for the education, not just for the actual, which I think is very good photography. So I'm excited to dive into this, but from a different angle, not
Yeah.
necessarily going to give us photography education because a lot of people are going to be like, why are we talking about this? What we're actually going to talk about is something that you and I had just I'm just going to call it a heart to heart, man. Just you and I on a
Yep.
call randomly. And we both
Yep.
just got on this topic of people that are letting, I shouldn't even say people, but when people let education become their excuse to avoid potential failure. Can you
Yep.
give an explanation of what I mean by that? Because I think you might be able to summarize a little better than I am, and then we'll dive into it.
Yeah, and I like sound bites because sound bites are things people connect with, and I don't have a great sound bite for this yet. So
Neither
I'll
do I. That's why I put it
apologize
on
if
you.
my right. I'll apologize if my description's a little bit all over the place. But here's something, and I notice it in the photography world where I'm working with photographers all the time. And when I got involved with podcasting, I kind of got into the podcasting thing right as everything was perched to blow up. And then of course it blew up and now everybody's in podcasting. And so when you started your community and I joined the community and was seeing people posting and seeing the questions and the conversations, I saw the same thing happening that I saw in the photography world. And that is that people are all about, I want to do it. And they even have themselves tricked, fooled, believing that, my God, I am like working my butt off at this. I've got this idea. But if we're keeping it real, what they're really doing is working hard at dreaming. They're spending a lot of time thinking about it. They're probably even doing tons of research, putting a lot of energy into reading, watching YouTube videos, getting through as many blog articles as they can, but they're not actually doing what they want to do. And the excuse is, well, you know what? I'm still trying to learn about this, and I'm still trying to get better at this, and I'm still having a hard time figuring this out. And I completely get it. It's fear of failure. right? Because if you're not actually doing it, this idea is still amazing and this idea is still a big opportunity and you haven't failed. But the reality of it is, I you have more experience as a podcaster, but I'm sure it's no different with podcasters. It's definitely the same with photographers and every creative I've ever met. There is no success without failure. There just isn't. So, the challenge is you really need to jump in. You really need to go. And where I think it's actually a really big issue in the podcasting world is, and I'll use just my little space of photography where I'm at. When I started my podcast, I had basically two podcasts that, I could look up to as a photographer, and maybe we'll go maybe as many as five others that were like, yeah, they were out there, but nothing to talk about. Now, in the course of just over a year and a half, there are literally hundreds of photography podcasts. There's probably well over thousands that are current out there. It's kind of one of those things, everybody's doing it. And so, and this is no different. I see this in every genre. I see it, marketing especially. My God. I mean,
Right.
I'm sorry, I know this will upset some people, but how many marketing podcasts are just people doing marketing podcasts, interviewing people doing marketing podcasts, who interview people doing marketing podcasts? And it's a big circle, right?
A
So
vicious cycle.
what value are, we really providing there until somebody breaks the circle and actually goes and does something, right? So I think that part of the pressure that exists, and I don't mean like, oh, horrible pressure, but like, look, if you really want to do it, is to realize that you're coming late to the party, right? And being late to the party is not a reason not to do it. If you've got a good why, in other words, what's your reason for doing the podcast? What's your message? What are you trying to accomplish? Cool. But the point is, the sooner you jump in, the sooner you can establish your space in the mix, the sooner you can actually begin to grow it, and the sooner you make the mistakes so that you're also able to figure out what's my real value proposition. Because if you're a smart business person, and I know, a lot of the people that get into podcasting in the business space, they understand the idea of a value proposition and they do all their planning and they do all the research. So I don't want to minimize the work that anybody's doing. But the fact of the matter is, if you've got that experience, you also know that 9 times out of 10, once you actually start, whether you're opening the doors to a brick and mortar business or whatever you're doing, you eventually find out that that value proposition that you planned, it's going to change. Because the one thing that's missing when you're planning all of this is, how are people really going to receive what you're giving them? What is their perception going to be? And oftentimes you realize you're going to fill a different niche than what you thought you would. You don't learn that until you start doing it. So that was not a short version of things.
It was shorter than my version, but you
Okay.
made it really clear. And just to really to quantify this, like this is happening in podcasting, and I can give
Sure.
you countless examples. But I just spoke at a podcasting conference in person a couple weeks back from time of recording this, and while I was there, I ran into people that I'd ran into previous years. So I haven't seen them due to COVID. Obviously, want this to be evergreen, but for a year and a half, no one was doing in person, right? So I hadn't seen them that much time. I found them at these conferences. I'm like, how's your show going? Oh, I'm getting really close to launching it. But that's what they were saying a year and a half ago. And they're still going to podcasting conferences. They're like, I'm just learning a little bit more. And I
Yep.
think that what you said was really just something very insightful. You say working hard at dreaming about it. And I think that so many of us, we just get stuck in this loop of being like, I got to learn a little bit more. I got to learn a little bit more. A great place I actually see this happening, I shouldn't say a great place, a place that I see this happening though, thanks to all the TV shows on flipping houses and stuff like that. Everyone wants to try to flip a house. But I know people that have been trying to educate themselves for years. And I have a friend here in my local town. I was actually at dinner with him last night and I asked him, like, hey, when did you like know that you were ready to flip a house? He goes, the first time I flipped one and went terrible. He's like, I spent 6 months learning it. He goes, but honestly, none of that meant anything until I actually like had to hire a plumber and had to
Yep.
get a painter and had to fix a foundation. So his thing was that I learned better in real time than anything ever taught me. But so many of us are scared to make that jump. And Joe, like to just start off with a really big question here. Why are people scared of this potential failure? Like, why do we get in this analysis paralysis instead of actually jumping into it? Like, what is the cause of that? If we can answer that question.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's honestly, it's simple. It's human. It's human nature. Nobody likes failure. We can look at a little bit of kind of social history over, let's say, the last 40, 50, 60 years. not to get really corny, but the world evolves, people evolve. As a species, humans evolve. And, one of the things that is happening generationally is that younger generations today really struggle with anxiety much more. And, taking all the type stuff and, calling one generation a snowflake or another generation boomers and all that crap, taking that off the table, the reality of it is there's a lot of really legitimate reasons. And honestly, my generation tends to be tough on younger kids because, yes, they struggle with all these things. And, for us, it was like, get your head out of your ass and go do what you got to do, right?
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, our generation actually had it easy, even though, people my age like to say, oh, no, we had it tough. No, we didn't, because, younger generation today, my wife's a college professor. The college kids that she's teaching now, so these are these 18 to 22-year-olds. These kids lived through Columbine. They lived through Parkland. They've lived through school shootings. Think about all the things that they lived through that we haven't lived through. So the fact of the matter is, when we say, well, why is it so tough for younger people, or why is it so tough for this group or that group? The fact of the matter is everybody's got these different experiences that create certain stressors. Everybody's afraid of failing, right? And the reality that everybody gets slapped with, and gosh, Alex, you know this better than anybody because, you were one of those crazy people that decided, I'm not just going to do a podcast. I'm going to build 6 web communities and all this other stuff around it.
Right.
It's this really cool idea when you start. And then when you actually start, you realize, holy crap, there's a lot of work involved if I'm going to do this well, right? And it doesn't matter if you're just putting out a single podcast, or if you're using that podcast to market a business or to grow a following, or whatever the premise is, there's a lot of work. So, humans, and I'm not trying to be, mean towards anyone, but it's a psychological thing. We are lazy by nature. And I'm not saying that in an insulting way. What I'm referring to is the idea that as a species, what do? We try to make things easier, simpler, faster. Especially look at all of our technology. Look at what we do with technology, right? Make it smaller, faster, lighter, make it easier to use, which is awesome. But the fact of the matter is we don't really want to have to do a lot of hard work. So we want to find the easiest way to do it. We want to try and ensure that we're going to have the easiest path to success. And unfortunately, in many pursuits, especially in my world of creative pursuits, the only path to success is through failure. There's just no simple way there. And I would argue podcasting is exactly the same, because while there may not be a ton of creativity in the sense that you have from an artist or a photographer when you're podcasting is relying on you, the podcaster, number one, developing a skill set. That's going to be the simple skill set, which you can offload a lot of, the editing, making your sound quality good. But the really, really important skill set is interview skills, personality, topic, information, things that are going to make people want to listen to you. Because here's a harsh reality about podcasting, right? Pick any topic that you want. There's probably at least 100 podcasts that are current today. It wasn't that way 2 years ago, but it is now, right? Because everybody's diving in and trying that. Already, when you go through a lot of the different, communities and forums, and you see tons of articles online, people are already whining about, oh, there's so much competition, there's this and there's that, as if like, yeah, just give up. Well, if it's that easy for you to give up because there's a lot of competition, that really should be an indicator for you. You shouldn't start, right? If you've got a message that is a good message, if you are willing to put in the work to figure out how to really communicate that message and make people connect with that message, then the only path is through the failure. But nobody wants to fail. And so it's a double-edged sword. I mean, certainly I get it. I don't like failure. But as a creative, to find success, you learn, and it's every one of the memes, it's every one of the corny quotes you've ever heard. You learn that, okay, you're going to fail with something, you're going to screw something up, and the next day, the sun's still going to come up, you're going to get up, you're going to create, life goes on. It's just part of the process. So even after all these years, I don't like failure, but because I've learned to cope with it, I had a shoot recently, a client shoot, advertising job, that went about as sideways as any project I have ever done in my entire career. And here I am at this point in my career. That should not be the case. But for a whole bunch of reasons, pretty much everything went wrong. And you don't stress about it. I mean, it's irritating when it's happening, but when you've been doing it for so long, it's like, okay, these things happen. I've got to solve problems. So you solve the problems and you work through it. And at the end of it, I'm really happy with the fact the client was ecstatic. The image that we produced, it's literally all over the place. In fact, I just found out this morning it's going to be on a magazine cover in Germany.
Wow.
So it's like,
That's amazing.
cool, right? So the failure is part of the process. When I look at the image now, I can look at the image and say, oh, okay, cool. I'm glad everybody likes it. But in my mind, I also fully understand that entire shoot, it was a total disaster. Everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. And quite a bit of it was actually my fault. And other things were things that were completely out of my control. And that's just what you deal with. So even, for somebody starting a podcast, and look, I'll be completely honest with you, Alex. I should have told this before we started. I actually just made the decision to stop podcasting weekly. I am literally going to just do my podcasts when I have a really good guest, and I'm going to serve them up through my website. And I'll tell you why. Because obviously we all know the statistic about how many podcasts fail and and how long it takes to fail.
Right.
So I approach things like podcasting. I approach things like YouTube. I have a following on YouTube, 177,000 subscribers. And I built 125,000 of that in a 2-year period. And once I did that, I actually stopped putting videos out every week. And people are like, what are you, nuts? Like, you built all that up. Why would you stop putting the videos out every week? And I stopped putting the videos out every week because, number one, in the first place, I didn't start doing YouTube and I didn't start doing podcasting because I wanted to be a famous YouTuber or I wanted to be a famous podcaster. I started YouTube and I started the podcast because there was a lot of buzz around both of those things. I got into YouTube back in 2009 when it was just starting to become a thing, right? I didn't really lock into YouTube and start using it and make it part of my business plan until 2016. So podcast, same thing. Podcasting was on the horizon. I'm a bit of a marketing nerd. I pay attention to the trends. I pay attention to things people are talking about. So it's like, okay, I've got a big audience. Let's see what I can do with this. And there comes a point where I can look at it and I can realize, well, I can keep plodding through this. I was starting to make money. I was starting to get some sponsorships. That's all good, but nothing that was going to take over and become a full-time income, which was not my goal. I wanted the podcast to further my educational reach, and I wanted the podcast to really create awareness about what I do from a teaching standpoint. So, in going back and looking through analytics and actually doing some online focus groups amongst like my Facebook group, getting people to answer a small survey for me about various podcast episodes I had done and what they drew from those episodes, what they found the most valuable, I started to realize, number one, photography, it's a visual pursuit, right? So it's, from the podcasting standpoint, yeah, you can talk about it, but you can't show it. So the challenge there is, even for a good interviewer, some photographers are really good at sharing knowledge, others, not so much. And that's the case in any field, right?
Right.
So, my realization was, okay, I can actually provide a lot more value instead of trying to train people, hey, you really need to listen to this every week, which I'd honestly rather have them out taking pictures and really using their cameras.
Yeah.
It puts a little bit more responsibility on me to really pick and choose who I'm interviewing and to make sure that I'm sharing interviews that really have value and can really teach people and then they can really learn something from. So one of the things the pandemic taught me about marketing, and I know I'm veering off a little bit here, but it kind of parallels how I got to this decision, was based on Instagram. I had been a slow starter for Instagram marketing, which for photographer, people are like, that's like sacrilege.
Right.
You should have been on Instagram right out of the box. It's all about photography.
That's funny.
My problem with Instagram early on was, okay, so I can post nice pictures and, you get likes on nice pictures, but to me, that honestly is kind of pointless. And maybe I'm an old guy, but I looked at it like, why should I just post pictures on Instagram? What's the point? finally, just by dumb chance, I was working on a YouTube video one day and I had some behind the scenes shots and a little behind the scenes video clip. And so I posted them all as a carousel. And that post like took off. And the light bulb went on. It's like, wow, you've been such a fool. You could actually teach on Instagram just like you do YouTube or a blog or anything else. So every one of my posts is a carousel post with lighting diagrams, behind the scenes clips, specifications on how I set the shot up. So I went from about 2,000 followers to 12 months later having almost 20,000 followers by turning it into an educational piece and providing, value. So I'm always looking at these things. I'll jump in as early as I can. If I don't see the value or don't see the path, I'll walk away as early as I can. And sometimes down the road later, like with Instagram, something pops up that says, boom, hey, here it is. So for me, what I learned with the podcasting stuff especially is that I can actually serve my audience better by not doing a weekly podcast, because there's a ton of them out there and there's a ton of people chasing the same people. And, and literally part of the trigger for me was interviewing a guy who was important in the photography industry. I was really happy to get the interview, and then realizing that within 3 weeks, there were 4 other podcast interviews that he had done, and it really didn't matter whose was better. It just was the matter of, okay, there's a ton of people chasing this now. There's a ton of duplicate content. I am exhausting a ridiculous amount of energy because my goal for the podcast, again, not to make money and get rich off a podcast, my goal was another way to educate people and another way for people to find out about my business model and what I do. So I look at, honestly, any aspect of marketing as disposable, simply because you have to look at what's going to get you the biggest draw, what's going to get you the best return. And just because something like right now, and sorry, but right now I would say to anybody that wants to start a podcast, it's like, man, you need to do some real soul searching. What are you bringing to the table that's different? And if you've got that different, if you really know what that different is, then man, go for it. Like, go all in, but understand you're going to have to kick and scream and fight to show that difference. But boy, if you do it, that's what people want, and I've always been that way with my photography. I'm one of those people, I hate trends. If everybody's going this way, you can guarantee I'm going to be over here. Like, and that way, the best part of that is, Alex, by being over here, I am the best photographer in the world at what I do. Right. And that's the key. It's just define yourself and find your audience. I think part of what happens, where the pressure comes from for people that kind of makes them reluctant to dive in, we get really focused on numbers today. We get really focused on, how many million followers do you have? How many people are tuning in on a weekly basis? And look, in the business world, the metrics are important. I completely understand that. But you can have an audience with 100 people and be making a whole lot more money than a guy that's got 1 million people listening, who hasn't monetized it properly, who's just putting stuff out there to, entertain people or whatever. You really have to know who your audience is and who you're trying to reach when you do these things. And I just think that for a lot of people, they're not being honest with themselves. And so that fear sets in, and then they're investing a lot of time. Because the downside to all this education is money spent, not just the time, because time is money, but, taking classes, working with coaches, buying books, buying hosting, buying all kinds of audio equipment, and then not doing it. It's like, why would you do that?
Right. There's so much there to unpack, but the first thing I want to mention here is the fact that for you, everything went back to the why behind why you're doing it, which was
About the why.
it was to educate. And so for you, it's funny, we're talking about like, don't let education become your excuse, but you focus on education. But I like the fact that your idea is to put people into action, and that's why you do what you do. So for you, you're not following the traditional method of what people say is a successful podcast, 1 episode a week or 2 a week, right? Like whatever it is, you're not following that. With your YouTube channel, you pulled back when it became time to do that. With Instagram, you didn't start from day one posting your pretty pictures. Like you worked your way to where you are always with the same why. Now, here's what I want to ask, because you being in the education space, when is the right time to jump in? Like, yeah, we're going to fail at some point, but when do we jump in? And like, how much education is enough for you to get started? Because when I'm listening to you, it sounds like you just kind of go for it. But what do you recommend to somebody?
I've always been that way.
Okay.
I'm not kidding. And look, it's not for everybody, but Alex, I've always been to the mentality that if I want to try something, I'm going to go try it, and I'll learn it along the way. And in part is, um, so there's been there's been kind of two levels to me kind of learning all this in my life. There's everything I learned up to the age of 40 and everything I've learned since. And the reason why I split it there, I met my wife when I was 40. So I always have to give this disclosure because I talk a lot about psychology and stuff like that. My wife is a cognitive psychologist. Fortunately for me, she's not a clinical psychologist because we wouldn't be talking. I'd be in a straight jacket right
Oh
now, I'm
no.
sure. But she's a cognitive psychologist, and interestingly enough, she has spent pretty much her entire life studying how, as adults, we learn and how the brain works with learning and education and things like that. So, when I met her, fortunately for me, I didn't think it was fortunate at first, but I would tell her about a photo shoot that I did, and she would do kind of the PhD thing and start telling me all the science, and I'd be like, no, 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 it's just creativity. Stop with the science stuff.
Right.
And fortunately for me, I was really lucky when she persisted, and I started to realize a really cool thing about it, and that was that number one. Fortunately, I had been lucky up to that point in my life that while I honestly think I have just as much anxiety as anybody else and just as much fear as anybody else, I wanted the experiences. So I would just jump in and I would figure it out as I go. Because as adults, the simple fact is, I don't care how much time you spend on YouTube, folks. I don't care how much you read. I don't care how many podcasts you listen to. Adults are experiential learners. So, here's one big tip for those of you that, have great resources that you like to turn to get information. That's awesome. I'm not saying give up on those resources, and I'm in no way saying education is bad. But in the photography world, I can't tell you how many photographers I meet that probably can actually recite more technical knowledge about photography than I've ever known. But sadly, can't shoot the side of a barn if they're standing in front of it because they've learned all this knowledge, but they've never put it to use. So the net result is they've just got a lot of stuff memorized, but it's not functional knowledge, right? So there's it's all about a balance. If you want to do these things, there's nothing wrong with doing research on YouTube. There's nothing wrong with listening to podcasts. There's nothing wrong with spending the money to get a coach. But if you don't go and do it, you're actually wasting all that time and all that money because you may have some cool facts in your head, but you don't really have any skills or ability, behind it. So, I think for a lot of people, it's like anything else in life. You have to condition yourself a little bit. You have to go ahead and jump off the cliff a couple of times. And then you start to realize you're not going to break any bones. The world's not going to end, and you pick yourself up. But if it's something that you really want to do, you're gonna work through it. And even, I get people, we get it in the photography space, and it's no different than podcasting. There are a lot of people that are doing coaching and teaching, and they've only been doing stuff for, a year or 2 years. And then you get one group that's like, oh, it sucks. They shouldn't be allowed to do that. Like, what are their qualifications? And then you get this other group that looks at these people and says, hey, wow, I can learn something. And the reality is this, right? If a person's teaching from their actual knowledge base and experience, there's always someone they can help. So it's not a bad thing that we have lots of teachers. It's a bad thing that we have a lot of bad teachers. And it's a worse thing. We have a lot of bad students because part of what happens is we have the luxury and we are fortunate to live in an information society where we have so much knowledge available to us and it's available at our fingertips. So we really are at a point where we can do almost anything we want and we can learn to do it pretty quickly if we're willing to put in the effort. But the problem of it is while we can do all that, a lot of us aren't really good at doing that. We don't really know how. I do a lot of mentoring for photographers. And so photographers are frequently, I'll give you one of the most generic ones, the most obvious ones. What do you think of this picture? And they show you a picture. And they think because I have this many years of experience, I'm going to be able to impart some incredible piece of wisdom to them about this picture. Now, a lot of photographers would look at the picture and say, well, you know what? It could be a little bit lighter, or your composition should be this way. And that, all of which is a bunch of hot air and completely worthless. I don't care who the photographer is. Somebody asked me a question like that. Unfortunately, I returned to them with about 15 questions for them. First question is, well, okay, what do I think about it? Why did you take the picture? What were you trying to accomplish? Did you come across any obstacles? Did you learn anything? And here's my big question, which I always ask a photographer. If you could do it again, if you could go back and take that picture again tomorrow, what would you do differently? And right out of the box, if they say, oh, nothing, then I tell them, well, then there's no point in me giving you an answer, is there?
Mm.
I can tell you honestly, every picture I've ever taken in my entire career, I could tell you something that I would do different if I had the opportunity again. And that's, I think, in part personality. I get bored easily. So once it's like been there, done that, okay, but I can always make it better. And the other part is embracing that idea that I could always make it better, because that's what, keeps driving you forward. So a challenge with this whole topic we're talking about, about the education thing being an excuse, is that also frequently we don't know how to be good students. And, when I started the Talk Chat podcast, I did what every logical person does today. I started Googling, looking for search information, trying to figure out who are my best resources. Did the same on YouTube. But one thing I did right out of the box is I narrowed it down. So one of the challenges with all this information, I don't care what your topic is, you go to YouTube, you go to Google, you find thousands of people that are posting information that are quote unquote experts. And I don't mean that in a snarky way. I just mean there are a lot of people with a lot of knowledge that are sharing it. That's cool. But think back to when you were in grade school. Think back to when you were in college. How many teachers were in each classroom? One, right? So while you're in that classroom, good, bad, or otherwise, you learned that topic from that person's perspective. So to me, the mistake that so many of us make is we're trying to take in every bit of information we can from so many different sources. And believe me, the podcasting world's no different than the photography world. So much of it contradicts.
Right.
One source says do it this way, the other source says do it this way. Two sources might be close, but they're still going to veer off from each other. So who do you listen to? Which do you do? And frequently, if you're not careful and if you're not putting in the thought process, you're going to follow part of one, part of another, which turns out to be a really bad mix. And so you're not actually helping yourself. So really the key with all this research is find the teacher, the mentor, the trainer, the coach, whatever. Find the one that you connect with, that you understand. You understand the way they explain things. You like their pacing. You like their teaching style. And give it a time period. Give it 6 months. Give it a year. But take in everything that you can from them and put it to use. So you're actually, testing it, okay, in real world situations. And what you're doing then is, number one, you are following the path of someone you respect. You are working on a very focused curriculum that's coming from one perspective. You're building your skills, which then allow you, once you're starting to find some confidence, to start looking at other resources where you're taking away nuggets. And you're taking away the nuggets because you've already got the basic understanding. But unfortunately, we all tend to do this big grab. So yeah, for me, when I started the podcasting thing, I did a lot of searching, found a lot of resources. I subscribed to like every podcasting newsletter out there, which even
Nice.
a year and a half ago, there were already too many,
Right.
right? And there's God knows how many now. And then over the course of the next like 2 to 3 months after I started digging into all this, I started unsubscribing from newsletters, keeping, the ones that, hey, this one's always got great resources and is pointing me in really good directions. And, only following a couple of YouTubers, especially for me, it was audio. Audio was like my Achilles heel. So I was looking for really good audio resources and finding people who, I understood the way they taught. They were doing it in a way that I could follow it, that type of thing. And then I just turned off all the rest of it. It's like, okay, let me do my thing. And I can tell you honestly, from a skill set, even just the audio editing, I was able to improve much faster because just like everybody else does, when I first started, my audio was horrendous. I was asking anybody I could talk to with audio experience, hey, how do I fix this? How do I fix that? I even paid a couple people to do some consultations with me so that I could get my settings just right. And it was all over the place. And then when I finally stopped, found one resource for free on YouTube, but followed just that one resource. And they had a lot of information already. And I started going through it, dialing in the settings, working on the things with a better understanding, because I had actually slowed myself down, focused on, all right, let's get all the pieces. I was able to get my audio together to the point that it sounded great. And I can do it consistently now. And I can even do a really good job of fixing bad audio when I'm interviewing somebody, which, initially, if I couldn't just throw a filter on it, I wasn't going to be able to fix it.
Right.
Right.
Man, this is, let me tell you what, like, I love what you're sharing here. I think it's so insightful. Like, first off, you're saying practice in real time. And I'm just gonna call it practice. Like, if you're trying to get good at something, just every time you learn something, go for it. But I really like the idea of finding the one person who really speaks to you, or one company, whatever it might be, but sticking with that resource and following it through. To me, when I think about everything you're sharing here, this is the proverb that came to mind. But there's that old proverb that says, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." I think that you putting into practice is that first step, but getting your backpack ready, getting your water ready is the education. But you want to do that as quickly as you can so you can start taking those first steps. At any point, you can stop. You can remove things from your backpack. You can add some things. You stop at a store, right? Like, you can start doing all that. But what's important that we're talking about here is finding your resource for learning and then applying it regardless of the failure that might happen. And for me,
Absolutely.
if you have a really big why, like a why that's really important, then the failure is okay because you're serving somebody with that why. So for me, if I fail when I'm trying to help somebody, that's okay in my book.
Right. Well, I think there's a couple things you find out. So, and I completely agree with you, Alex. And like, even if you flip the script, okay, so you tell me if I'm wrong, because I'm going to make a big assumption about you. Here you are in the podcasting world. You are absolutely a thought leader, right? You are a person who is, really not only just physically building resources for the podcasting community, but you're sharing your knowledge, and you're doing a lot of it in real time, and you're very open and you're very transparent about that, right? But so there's a couple things that's happening. Number one, you're still learning while you're sharing. The day that we stop learning, what the hell do we do next? Right? The day that we stop learning, honestly, is the day that we begin to become irrelevant in anything that we're doing, because the world's not going to stop. The world's going to keep going, right? And I know even from being a member of Podmatch, through some of your growth and that, there's been missteps, there's been server issues, there's
Plenty of
been
them.
these types of things. But guess
Right.
what? Right? Because you're busting your butt to build something that has tremendous value, I never once saw people type in comments in the communities like, "Oh man, you suck. How could you let that happen?" Like, there's none of that. Why? Because people realize there's going to be fumbles. It's okay that you fumble because you're a good guy and you're working on what you're doing and you're providing us something of value. So, I think that people kind of look at, a highly produced show and think, well, my God, like, I have to be that.
Hmm.
I have to sound like that. I have to act like that. I'm just doing this and I still don't know what I'm doing, but man, I got to make it sound like I've got a team of 6 people behind me. Like, that's ridiculous. Photographers do it all the time on their websites when they write like their about me page. We do this and we do that. It's like, how many we's do you have? It's like,
Right.
it's just you, right? It's like, yeah, it's just me. It's like, then say it's just you, because you're the one that's going to show up with a camera, for crying out loud, right? One of the things that goes along with all of the social media that we have and with the way that we do marketing today is the concept of brand transparency. Like, you can't be something that you're not, because you're going to get outed. You're going to get found out. So it makes no sense to try and be something that you're not. The best thing that you can do is be real. And if you really want to connect with people, because think about it, I mean, everything we're putting out, we're not putting it out for computers to listen to. We're putting it out for people to listen to. So that means that the people that are listening to it, they're human, they're flawed. You're human, you're flawed. People like to know that you're flawed, especially when they look up to you, especially if you're, at a point in your career where maybe, you've mastered it or you've achieved a certain level and you're going to start to share or do these types of things, people like to see that, gosh, you have the same kind of struggles too. That was one of the things, that was a mistake I made when I first started teaching. I thought like, oh, I'm a teacher, so like I've got to be perfect. My stuff's got to be amazing. Like I've got to know every little detail. Like, and I realized like that is not the case, because number one, that really put a divide between me and the people that I was teaching. And true story, the first presentation that I ever did for Olympus, the camera company, was in Nashville, Tennessee, at a huge photography event. It was on a stage, and I was scared to death of actually having to shoot in front of a crowd of people. I had always avoided it. And they talked me into doing it. I said, okay, I'll do it. It was a Sunday morning. There were probably 100 people that were in attendance. There were 3 speakers. I was the second one. The first speaker, she came on, and they had all kind of technical issues with the audio. The
Oh
cameras
no.
weren't connecting properly, the computers. So I'm panic stricken. Comes time for me to talk. They got the audio fixed, but they couldn't get the cameras to connect. They couldn't get my camera to connect. So at the last minute, they're like, here, use hers because it's still working. The problem is the cameras we use are highly
Right.
configurable. You
Yep.
customize them. So her camera's not set up at all like mine. It's like, here, go. And I've never shot in front of people. I'm not kidding. I was shaking in my boots. So I walked up on the stage and I basically said, I'm going to walk you through everything, start to finish. And you know what? And there were guys in the booth basically running the camera system so that stuff went up on these big TV screens. I said, hey, you guys in the booth, do me a favor, let everything go on the screen, everything. So I showed people my test shots, the mistakes, like, oh, that's way too late. So let's change this. And I just talked out loud. This is what I'm changing. This is what I'm going to do. People loved it. People were like, oh my
Hmm.
God, like you're real.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
because that's the same kind of stuff that happens to me when I take pictures. And for me, that was this light bulb moment of like, yeah, if you want to teach with people, a big part of that is connecting with people. So don't try to set yourself apart as being different, or and I would argue to anybody doing the podcasting thing today, a great way to really build brand loyalty, in addition to, of course, putting out valuable content, is to be real about who you are and what you're doing and why you do it and how you do it and the struggles that you're having, because your audience, they're really not a lot different than you. So they appreciate that, and they tend to appreciate more the fact that you're putting in the effort and that you're putting yourself out there and that you're willing to allow yourself to be vulnerable enough to make those mistakes and share it. And really what you're able to do in those situations, which is what I learned in that one day at that one trade show, is you're really able to kind of set an example for people to say, listen, it's okay, right? It's okay not to be perfect. It's okay not to be, 1,000% polished. And I'm a perfectionist, but I learned really early on as a photographer 2 things. One, you're never going to achieve it. So just understand, while you're being a perfectionist, you can't achieve perfection. And God forbid if you did, what the hell do you do for an encore?
Good point.
Right?
Good
So,
point.
so the idea of being a perfectionist is a great value set. And I still hold on to that. One of the things I'm most proud of in my photography is details. You don't see sloppy stuff unless it took me 20 minutes to get it that kind of cool sloppy, right? That's one of the things I'm most proud of with my photography. But so it's a value set that you can't let it get in your way, but you use it to help move you forward. But when you're sharing that, when you're open with people, I find for me it has helped build really, really solid connections with a lot of my audience, and it has shown people that, yeah, I'm a guy out here that's doing what they want to do, but I'm not some, blessed person that was just so incredibly talented that they're perfect and everything's just easy. And it's not, no, I'm just like anybody else. I'm figuring it out as I go through life, and I'm learning as much as I can, and I'm driving myself to keep doing more. And I'm willing to share it. That's maybe the difference is, I'm at a point where I'm willing to share it. They're at a point where they're trying to learn it. So it's a good fit.
So for me, just based off what you just shared there, like I think back to one of the mistakes I made with Podmatch. I've made plenty with my podcast. I've made plenty in everything I've done. Like I'm as far from perfect as anyone gets. I'm very common. Like I'm just like anybody else, right? And I think that's the one of the things that's important for everyone to understand. We're all make a ton of mistakes, but the human element's so important. It had been real easy for me when I made this mistake on Podmatch, affected just under 300 people. It's been real easy for me to be like, give me a company letterhead. We're going to send out a memo about it. We're going to tell them we're fixing it as quickly as we can. Instead of doing that, I said, hey, I talked to my co-founder and developer, Jesse. I'm like, Jesse, give me the email addresses of each of those people. I emailed them. He's like, you want like the logo or anything like that? I'm like, nope, I'm just going to put it in plain text. And I owned it myself. I'm like, hey, want to let you know I made a huge mistake and it affected your account. Here's what we're doing to fix it. I am so, so sorry. If you have any frustrations or anything like that you want to share, please let me know. It was like 3-4 sentences. That was it.
Sure.
And I'll tell you what, that was me. Instead of waiting too long to learn something, we implemented it too soon, made a mistake. We've learned our timing a little bit better. But instead of just me trying to like hide the mistake, I owned it. We failed. We messed up. And I'll tell you what, I have more people that are loyal to Podmatch and to what I do because of that one action I took than anything else.
Yep.
I expected to get cussed out by all these people. I got nothing but I must have gotten 100 and some odd nice responses of like, hey man, it's okay. Like we're all human. We all make mistakes. Like people were saying that. The grace that people have for each other is always surprising because we think that it doesn't exist. But the truth is, when you make a mistake because you're trying to help and serve somebody, people have a lot of grace for that along the way.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, well, I actually one thing I'd even add to that, which that's as far as I'm concerned, that's the right way to handle things, Alex. But like, especially in the YouTube world, people talk about the trolls all the time, and it's no different in podcasting where you get the nasty comments. When I started YouTube, I for the first couple of years while the channel was really blowing up, I spent literally 2, 3, sometimes 4 hours a week, and I answered every single comment that went up on my videos before it
Wow.
got to the point where it
Honorable.
was getting out of hand. But here's the trick: the ones that I put the most effort into responding to were indeed the trolls, because I figured something out pretty early on that most of the time when people left nasty comments, there was a lot more going on than just what they thought about my video and what they had to say. And when I say a lot more going on, I mean they might have been having a bad day. Frequently, the trolling type comments are really more of a reflection on the person that left the comment than they are the person making the video. But the cool lesson that I learned is when I responded to their comments, and it was always with a thank you. I always literally the first 2 words were thank you, because I decided to take the mentality, I should say, that even though I may not like the way they said it, I may not like the tone, that there's probably some value in there. I just may have to look for it. So I would thank them for taking the time to leave that comment. And depending on just how nasty the comment might have been, I would go on to explain, please understand, I was doing my best to share the information, that I did, but I always want to learn and I always want to get better. So it would help me a lot if you could explain a little bit more, or, at that point I would try and ask them specifically something about what they said. 9 times out of 10, the people would respond with an apology. And it would be an apology. It's like, I was really out of line. I shouldn't have gone off like that. But here's what I was having an issue with. Or what, at which point now I've got golden feedback. And the
Yeah.
golden feedback was me being aware that as an educator, it's not the student's responsibility to understand what I teach. It's my responsibility to connect with them where they are at their level of experience. And it's that constant learning cycle of the students keep changing. So me having to learn how to keep connecting and reconnecting. And honestly, that was one of the most valuable things for me in terms of building that brand loyalty. And it's just like what you're talking about. We all tend to forget with all this technology. I mean, even like right now, you and I have talked several times video, but we've never actually met, which hopefully
Right.
we do one day.
I'm hoping
But we
so.
forget with all this technology, there's people on the other end of it, right? So even the idea that so many podcasters, like you and I had a conversation when you were like looking to build your Instagram, and we were having a conversation about how people shout on social media, not shout with all capital letters, shout by just promotion, 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 promotion. And that gets old. We don't do that in real life. We wouldn't do that amongst our friend circle. We wouldn't do that at a cocktail party. So, why do we do it with computers? And I think people tend to forget all of that. If you always have your audience in mind with what you're doing and who you're talking to, And if you take the time to get to know your audience a little bit, and I don't mean you have to be buds with them, right? But just to actually interact so that you can get a human sense of what are their struggles? What are they trying to get from your content? To me, it makes it so much easier to figure out how to put out better content. Because otherwise, why are you doing it? You just feel like standing on a soapbox and spouting off.
Right.
And if that's your why, then okay. But if you're trying to build an audience that you are going to turn into a loyal following who is going to spend money with you in one way or another, then the better you can understand them, the better your product is.
Love it. Joe, this has been such a valuable conversation. I know we're at the end of our time here looking at the clock. Real quick, do you have a quick final thought for the listeners and people that are watching this today?
Well, I would say two things, and we kind of touched on both on Alex, but honestly, number one, for any of this stuff, it's a lot of work. And I don't say that to discourage people. I say that so that you remember, understand your why. Always remember your why. I don't care if you're a day into it, a week into it, a month, a year, 5 years into it. Know your why, because that's how you hold yourself accountable to you and what you like. And that's what makes the work easier. I said three things. Second piece is understand that your why can change, right? And your why will probably change. And that's totally okay. And even if your why is a big change, you may lose a couple followers along the way. But if you're passionate about where you're going, you're going to pick up a whole bunch of new ones. And that's okay too. Right? And then the third thing is I'm just working on a Christmas present for my grandson who played his first big year of Little League Baseball this year, and they won the championship. So I'm thinking of a baseball quote. You can't steal second base with 1 foot on first. If you want to do this stuff, if you're putting in the energy to research it and to buy gear and learn software and all that, just go do it. I always get the quote wrong, so I'm not going to claim I've got the quote right, but I think it was Zuckerberg. Sometimes it's attributed to Steve Jobs, but it's the break shit and move on quote, right? It's just, life's too short. Life's too short to keep dreaming about things. Life is for the living. Go do it. Just jump in and do it. And you're going to scrape your knees. You're going to bounce off the walls. You're going to fall down. Just like as a little kid, get back up and keep going forward because, and if you need that reminder, if you don't have any grandkids or you don't have kids, go find a toddler at a playground and watch a toddler for an hour and look at how they go through life. Somehow, some way, for some reason, we teach that out of kids. We teach them to stop asking why. We teach them to be afraid because you might bump your knee, right? And so the challenge is get that back. Find a way to get that back. And it all becomes a lot easier and it becomes a lot more fun.
Love it, Joe. This has been such a fun conversation, man. I just really appreciate your time and your wisdom you share with us today on such a topic that I am just so passionate about. But thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. And as always, thanks for what you're doing for the community, man. Seriously,
Absolutely.
bravo.
Glad to be doing it,
Yeah.
man. Thank you so much. Take care.
Take care. Bye now.